Welcome to Discover You, an inspiring podcast exploring cutting-edge solutions to our everyday psychological challenges. We explore complex mental health issues and talk to professionals, experts, and renowned authorities at the forefront of transformative healing. Our mission is to educate and destigmatize, and to ultimately view mental health as a proactive quest for optimized living and equilibrium, rather than mere crisis intervention. Welcome to another episode of Discover You, our podcast exploring innovative and effective solutions to issues in mental and behavioral health. I'm JD Kalmenson, CEO of Montare Behavioral Health, one of the fastest growing behavioral health companies in Southern California. I'm really happy and excited to be able to introduce you to our incredibly knowledgeable and engaging guest today, Tim Ringgold. Tim is a board-certified music therapist, host of Reduce Your Stress podcast and summit, and author of Sonic Recovery, Harness the Power of Music to Stay Sober. He has provided music therapy to thousands of teens and adults in treatment centers and hospitals since 2008. Tim is also an award-winning international speaker, having shared the stage with some of the top minds on music, the brain, and personal development, including Tony Robbins. Tim was the first person to give a TED Talk on music therapy in 2012. Tim is also a former regional president of the American Music Therapy Association. Tim walked into his first 12-step meeting in 2003, so he knows personally what it's like to work and play program of recovery. Thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time. And I'd love to, just off the bat, give us maybe a little bit of a backstory to how you got into this field, music and addiction, how music supported you throughout your life. These are two very powerful experiences, and here you are fusing them together and enriching and enhancing and saving so many lives in the process. What's the backstory?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, JD. It's great to be here. I started, like many kids, on a stage singing in a choir and sang my first solo when I was 4. And then by the time I was 16, I was singing on a much bigger stage, which was the steps of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome for the Pope. And so music was part of my life for as long as I can remember, but it wasn't really until like the lowest point of my life that I really understood what music could do for me or for anybody else. Because when I was 22, while I was actually at a concert shouting my head off, my 5 best friends were murdered. And I had to go to 5 funerals in 4 days. Now, it was like Groundhog's Day from hell. Like, basically, I'd get up, bury a friend, get as hammered as possible, pass out, and then wake up and have to do the whole thing over again the next day. And let me tell you, during that week, I tried everything to numb the pain. But fast forward, and I sang, P.S., a song, my way of saying goodbye at all of my friends' funerals. And it tore me up inside, but my community came out like crazy saying, "This was so healing. That was so powerful. Thank you so much." Now, I'll be honest with you. I didn't know what they were talking about because as I was delivering the music, it was tearing me apart. But they were having a very different experience receiving it. And then the night of the last funeral, I went to see some live music for myself. And for the first 2 hours since I had gotten the news, I found peace. And no amount of drugs, alcohol, food, porn, cable TV had numbed that pain all week. And I just stacked behaviors and substances on each other, doing what I could to numb the pain, and nothing worked. But the music did. And so since that moment in 1995, I've dedicated my life to helping others reach for music in their toughest times.
Wow. Before you tell us a little bit about what music therapy actually is, I would love to know a little bit about just the history and some timelines, because today it's a hot topic. People talk about it and it's prevalent. It's part of a lot of the curriculums and treatment centers. And I'd love to hear from you. Does it have any type of, accreditations and, empirical outcomes? But definitely this is something that has come onto the scene of recovery more recently. So
Yes.
what would you say, sort of like a historical timeline into when it was maybe initially introduced until when it started to gain steam, until really where it is today, where you don't really have a respectable, reputable treatment center that will not offer music therapy as one of their modalities?
Yeah, music therapy as a field, it's considered an allied health field. And we started as a field delivering or providing degree programs in the United States in the 50s. So that was when the first you could get a bachelor's in music therapy. And so you can get a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD in music therapy. There's only about 80 schools, though, in the United States that offer that degree. When you go through the bachelor's, you complete a 1,200-hour clinical internship, and then you're eligible to sit for a national board certification exam. If you pass that, you become board certified, and then you have to go on and continue with 100 CEUs every 5 years, much like a lot of other allied health professionals, clinicians, both in medical and behavioral health. And, music's been used therapeutically for as long as we have recorded history. But as a science-based modality, we started to do research on music. And instead of thinking about it as the art of music, we started to look at it through the science of music lens. And what really happened, JD, was once neuroscience emerged as a field, and we have the invention of the fMRI, we can start to essentially videotape the brain. And when that happened, neuroscientists were able to see that music as a stimulus lit up the brain in ways that no other stimulus in nature does. And at that moment, and that's roughly around the end of the 20th century, so in terms of a timeline, at that moment, suddenly, the work that music therapists had been doing through more of a psychological lens suddenly took on a much more Western-based, quantitative-based validation, if you will, because now people could see physically on camera the difference between a brain on music and a brain off of music.
Wow, that is so interesting. The world at large knows music therapy, I believe, largely within the prism of addiction recovery, because it is something that has so much power and influence in someone's life at such a time of dire need. What other areas or what other diagnoses and facets of mental health would you say music therapy is super helpful and effective in treating?
Yeah, music therapy is applied across the lifespan. So we work with clients literally from preterm infants to the elderly to people who are actively dying and everywhere in between because of what happens neurologically with music and the brain. So there's all kinds of opportunities to point music at problems as a treatment modality. In mental health, the research is great on music for relieving anxiety and particularly stress, the stress response. And as we know in addiction treatment, the stressed brain craves. And so if we can have tools that allow the nervous system to reset and turn off that stress response quickly, we can avoid those cravings that the brain is designed to follow the craving. It's not designed to resist it. So the game becomes, how do we, turn that stress response off in the nervous system as fast as possible? So for people with anxiety, also with people with depression, oftentimes they're struggling because the human brain's very unique in that it can trigger its own stress response internally because of our thoughts. Only mammal that seems to be able to do that. All other mammals, their stress response is initiated by an outside threat. But with humans, it can be internal. It can be our thoughts and our feelings that can trigger that stress response. So music therapy has been very effective particularly in helping with anxiety and also helping with depression.
It's so interesting that you say this because the more you talk about it, in my mind, one of the questions I was going to pose to you is we sort of internally have broken down addiction at Montare and at our chemical dependency programs into three broad categories based on our experiences, and we're actually putting it into a curriculum of treatment. And the three categories, to make a long story short, have to do with intrinsic addiction, which is a spiritual malady of sorts, people who feel a vacuum and a void and a certain deficiency in meaning and purpose. And for them, mind-altering substances become a way to numb that pain, that emptiness, that loneliness. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people who really are dual diagnosis, suffer from very acute mental health conditions and not being medicated or not having psychiatric or psychological or holistic intervention, resort to chemicals and resort to drugs and alcohol to, again, numb that pain, which they're not treating organically through traditional mental health interventions. And then you sort of have the circumstantial addict, the addict who circumstantially, had a terrible accident, ended up in the hospital, a bunch of painkillers, which morphed into, crack or cocaine, or ended up partying just a little bit too much in college, and then the addiction took on a life of its own. And the question I was going to ask you is, so which of these three do you think music therapy is most effective in? And even from the little bit that you've been sharing with us, it seems like it's an incredibly effective and powerful tool for all three, for finding meaning, for dealing with anxiety and depression in the mental health arena, for dealing with circumstantial, to get out of one's head circumstantially. It sounds like all across the board, it's just a really powerful asset.
I really appreciate the paradigm that you've created with these three types of clients that are presenting in one being a spiritual malady, as you said, like filling the void. The second one with the kind of the more common dual diagnosis, where addiction is an attempt to solve a problem the person's having. And then this third one where, there might have been some sort of acute trauma, and then suddenly that triggers a new pathway that they're going down, like not like a slippery slope or a spiral. And as I think about them, and I think about the application of music therapy in all three, immediately, I see how I would apply music in the first case, because one of the things music does, let me back up. Personally, I love the book Unchain Your Brain by Doctors David Smith and Daniel Amen. Great book on addiction recovery. And they have a lens that they look through called a biopsychospiritual or biopsychosocial spiritual lens. So the person is, there's a biological element to a psychological element, social element, and spiritual element. And for me, the spiritual connection with music is, how do I connect with something outside of myself so I don't feel alone? And I think for a lot of people, that void, and I actually wrote a song called The Void based on my first step, because it was the void that drove me in my behavior. And so I was just like, oh man, they're totally speaking my language here. Music was the bridge of connection, because when I hear someone else's story in their song and I relate to their story in the lyrics, I'm like, wait, that's my story. I know. Just this morning, JD, I was showing my wife lyrics from a Foo Fighters song off their new record. We were lucky enough to see him at the Forum last week. And there's a song on their record, and it brought tears to my eyes because it was my story. So that and for me, spirituality is connecting with something outside of myself, whatever the noun you want to use. And music builds that bridge. And then just from the dual diagnosis, I kind of accidentally already explained that prism. But then also with circumstantial, a lot of times people go through experiences of trauma, and that could be physical, or it could be psychological, it could be social or spiritual. And they're trying to, numb some sort of pain they're experiencing in one of those four categories. And then the problem is that whatever they were introduced to worked, and then they became dependent on that, and then didn't know how to live without it, right? And so how do we wean them off that and introduce other tools that treat pain in those four areas? And music has been shown in research to relieve pain in all 4 different areas. So it's one of the great things about music therapy. It's not just effective, it's efficient because it can work across perspectives or lenses or philosophical kind of foundations. In fact, one of my finals when I was in college, we had to do a music therapy intervention as a class and then write about what was happening therapeutically through 7 different psychological lenses. And so what we found, it was brutal. And what we found was music therapy works across multiple different approaches. So depending on your approach, you can apply music specifically clinically to cause an outcome predictably.
Wow. That is astonishing. It's mind-boggling. It's so incredible. I mean, there's something I want to ask you. But as a way of introduction to the question, I want to share with you a quick story. Okay. There was once a scholar who conveyed that these deep mystical teachings can only be understood by somebody who has an appreciation for music. It would require that level of refinement, that level of sensitivity. And one of the disciples who became a spokesman for these teachings was known to be tone deaf. And they challenged this disciple. How are you the mouthpiece, the ambassador for these teachings when you can't sing for the life of yours? You can't. We know that. You open your mouth and we close our ears. And he said, I might not be able to sing, but I definitely appreciate music. And that's the question I want to ask you. So music therapy is such a powerful tool. Is it an objective tool or is it subjective? Does it depend, for example, on what type of genre resonates with you? Or does it have objective properties that resonate across the board? And what happens if somebody doesn't overtly appreciate music at all? Is this something that becomes a viable option?
That's a great question. And the answer is it's both. And I'll unpack it from the subjective side and then the objective side. So on the subjective side, when we're teens from like 14 to 24 and we are developing our identity, one of the things we imprint with for identity formation is music. And so we kind of fall in love with our music. It's almost like we can't live without it during that golden decade, right? And that's how we form peer groups and we feel part of something bigger than ourselves, which as mammals, as pack animals, that's very important to feel like you're part of a tribe. And so music is a social glue. And music's been used as a social glue for tens of thousands of years. There are, evidence of instruments and cultures, and there's no known culture that doesn't have music as a part of it. So we know that it's this intrinsic connection device. And we also know that today that there is this subdivision of music in the word you use, genres. It takes on this aesthetic quality, and we start to identify with one genre. We actually don't identify with another genre. And that's part of what creates this identity formation. And so we can use that in music therapy to allow patients and clients to identify with something they connect with, they resonate with. Because for me, in addiction treatment and mental health treatment, one of the most important words is connection. When a patient feels like they're connecting to something outside of them that's safe, that's a game changer. And when they come into treatment, they don't know the staff. They certainly didn't pick the other clients that they're there with. They kind of inherit them like siblings, but they already have a connection with music. And so that psychological safety that they feel as a result of music, their music, is really important to them. And we can use that. And I'll tell a story later on about like a case study of that. But then on the objective side, particularly rhythm, like tempo of rhythm, activates the autonomic nervous system regardless of genre. So one of the jobs I used to have before I worked in mental health, I worked in a hospital setting, and I would slow down patients' heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rhythm when they were in a coma in the ICU. And so there was no genre because they were in a coma. I was literally just using the elements of music to objectively slow down these key performance markers of their body, being heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rhythm, so that the treatment team could titrate down all the drugs that they were on. Because if they're hypertensive, they would have to give them more of these medications, which in an ICU setting, it's this high pressure environment of cocktails, and you want them on the least effective dose possible. So we can use music objectively and we can use music subjectively. And how we use it objectively in a treatment setting for mental health is to slow down and turn off the stress response in patients and clients so that they learn what their body feels like when it's in a ventral vagal state, when it's safe, when that parasympathetic nervous system is running, that rest and digest part of our nervous system, which is what I call the create and connect part of our nervous system. And so when patients can learn that they can slow down their nervous system using music, that's a great tool for their own self-care.
Wow, that is profound, I have to say. The objective and subjective, I mean, it sounds to me, to reiterate in a sentence or two what you're saying, that the subjective quality of music is an expression of the individuality of any given human who struggles with chemical dependency. And that is a very intimate part of them. And there's going to be a specific genre, a specific cultural type of music that becomes that expression. And then the objective component and dimension to music is more of an instrument to be able to pry into a very deep place within the brain to sort of generate certain stimulus and responses.
Yes.
So just a quick follow-up, because I'm so curious about this. The objective quality of music therapy, the ability to lower and reduce anxiety, is there any specific genre that's more efficient or more effective in that regard? Is classical music, for example, better or more effective in reducing anxiety and stress than reggae or heavy metal?
That's a great question. What we've found typically, we get in a little bit into acoustics, the sound of sound, if you will. And what we find is that tempo, like just beat by itself, you can play to another nervous system, and that nervous system will entrain and connect, even without any other musical stimuli. Just the snap sound itself, the brain will automatically connect to that. Past that, it becomes somewhat personal preference. So we know across, culture, across genre, across music preference, that the beat itself is what the nervous system is entraining to on an objective level. And so what we typically will play is what we would call culturally relevant music. So if you're born here in the Western culture, you're familiar with, like, your brain has a sense of music as a language. There's chords and notes, and your brain understands that there's a major key and a minor key. The major key is associated with the happy, warm key. The minor key is associated with kind of the cooler, kind of sadder key. And in Western music, we kind of have this framework where our brain kind of links emotions to those two keys. So a music therapist will typically use the major key and play music within the major key, because we know that in our culture, like, that is the key that is associated with feelings of happiness, feelings of comfort, like that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Can you share some stories with us about people suffering from mental health or addiction who have benefited directly from music therapy?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is what makes my work, so fulfilling, is seeing transformation, or hearing or reading, depending on how the client or the patient responds. But one of the topics I haven't touched on yet is drumming. So all bodies, our physical body runs on rhythm. It's just a repeated pattern. It's how our cells organize their activity based on rhythm. Our organs run on rhythm. Our systems, each system runs on rhythm. Our bodies are actually rhythm machines. Now, some of us dance better than others, but that's not rhythm. That's coordination. So if you can scratch an itch, everybody scratches in perfect rhythm. When you hammer a nail, you hammer in rhythm. You walk in rhythm, you talk in rhythm, you sleep in rhythm. Your body runs on rhythm, and there's a ton of rhythm and coordination and muscle memory already in the body. If you can bounce a ball, you can dribble a ball. I can't shoot hoops, save my life, JD, but I can bounce a ball. You bounce a ball in rhythm, you can play a hand drum. So if you can hammer a nail, you can play a frame drum. If you can scratch an itch, you can shake a shaker. Watch, I'll just kind of. And so the human body has lots of ways that it can participate musically. Even for the 3 out of 100 that are tone deaf, they can move their body rhythmically in some way. But 97% of us, our vocal cords work, but they're just like anything else. If we don't train them, they're not very coordinated. So drumming is an immensely easy tool to connect people with. I can show people how to be successful making music with shakers and hand drums in about 60 seconds. It takes very little time. Now, Western European instruments like orchestral instruments and band instruments and even a drum set, those are all immensely complicated, complex, expensive, hard instruments to make a pleasing sound out of. And as a musician, I still can't make a pleasing sound out of a violin. No, I've never done it. It's been, dying cats every time. Really challenging instruments. But drumming, that's something we can all access easily. So a cornerstone of my sober method is drumming and getting people to connect to the beat. Because when they connect to the beat, they connect to each other by proxy. So it's a safe way for patients to connect with each other without it feeling confrontational. So one particular day, I'm leading a group and we're doing clinical improvisation, which is kind of like a jam session where I create a heartbeat on a big bass drum and I just show the clients how to use the rhythm instruments. And then I just say, explore the sounds on these instruments and then just connect the sound to the beat. Your only job today is to explore and connect. That's it. We're not going to write anything, learn anything, perform anything, none of that. This is just explore and connect. And this one particular client, he's pretty quiet. He didn't actually speak maybe anything other than his first name during the whole group. He's got a buffalo drum. So it's a frame drum with some, rope in the inside, and you kind of bang on it with a mallet, and it's like you're hammering a nail. And that's the instrument that he chose to use. And he's drumming throughout the session. And we're having, a cohesive session. At the end of it, we have the clients fill out these little summary notes. Hey, what's a takeaway from this session? And just describe the emotion you're feeling. Just, have them write it instead of speak it. Because for a lot of clients, they're uncomfortable opening up in front of their peers. And this young man wrote, I finally found a way to get the violence out of me. Now, JD, his arms from wrist above the elbow were littered in scars from cutting. He had tried everything to literally get the violence out of him. Now, I don't even know what that means. I don't have an experience of that in my body. But it's important for us to think about emotions as energy in motion. We think thoughts in our head, but we feel feelings in our body. And here's a young man who's feeling what he calls violence inside his body. And he's trying to get it out and hasn't found a tool and has littered his arms with scars. And in one music therapy session, he discovers a tool that works for him. I'll never forget that young man as long as I live.
That is incredible. That is such a beautiful story. The more I think about it, the more to the layman like myself who is not proficient in it, I'm seeing kind of two different potential experiences emerging from music. One thought that comes to mind is, I toured Europe as a teenager, and there was a certain song I was listening to right when the iPod came out over and over again. And it was just a certain song. And 10, 15 years later, I'll hear that song and I will literally be transported to that memory in a very deep, dramatic, psychological, and physiological way. I will smell the French bread of Paris, and I'll remember that train going from Switzerland to Italy because of that song. And so much of what we want from the people who are looking for recovery is to give them a certain depth of emotional memory, to be able to remember emotions, whether for the good or for the bad. Remember how this made you feel last time, or also remember how not giving in and capitulating to that substance, not doing X, Y, and Z, how that made you feel. So emotional memory is such an integral part of recovery. And then music literally can bring you to that feel. I mean, emotional memory is almost like a foundational building block to a certain really deep sentiment, which is, again, what music is bringing you to. And then
Totally.
Conversely, so is that what you're working on in music therapy? In bolstering that.
This is so great. Like I'm loving, you just like teed up one of the pieces of our treatment, which we just talked about, using drumming as a cornerstone of it. And there's a couple of reasons why. And one of them is also that music's time-based. So when you make music, you're physically with your body. You're now physically in your body. You're embodied and your body's always present. So for those who suffer from anxiety, a lot of times they're up in their head about the future, or depression, they're up in their head about the past. When you make music with your body, it's an embodied experience. So you're present, and mindfulness becomes a byproduct of making music. So it's this great tool to be able to have a tool to stay present, which is the first, is the S of my acronym for sober. But sometimes the stress is in the present and you need a tool to escape. And for a lot of us, that's what screens have become, a tool for escape. And that's what substances have become, a tool for escape. But there's a particular music therapy application that I call the relaxation vacation. And it's based on this research at Harvard Medical School by a guy named Dr. Herbert Benson. And he has this principle called remembered wellness, where if you walk a patient back to a time in their past of their choice, where in that moment they felt psychologically safe, happy, healthy, connected, and you walk them through their senses in that experience. And I love that you mentioned the smell of the French bread. I was like, yes, because your body and your brain store all of that data. And music acts as a memory marker for that data. And it opens that file and suddenly, whoop, it's all there. And the brain, human brain, we know the same part of the brain lights up when we review an event as when we view the event, as when we preview an event. So we can use that understanding to move someone to a place of psychological safety, particularly people with trauma, because they don't trust their past, because they have just a handful of really painful memories that their brain's designed to remember evolutionarily. And we want to guide them past those landmines to all that safety that's still there in their memory so that they can trust that there's all kinds of safety and all kinds of evidence that the world can be a safe place and they can be safe in it. And music's an immensely fast tool at doing that. And the opposite is true. Music you need to beware, because your party playlist will trigger all the emotions, the euphoria, the high, and will trigger cravings. So people can be doing great work in rehab and then go listen to their party playlist and then act out that night and not know why. And the reason why is because of that neuroassociation between the music that they used to over and over and over again. They listen to that music, it'll trigger that same state again in their body. And then suddenly they're looking to use. So we have to be very, very conscious of the power of music as that kind of dissociative tool to leave the present and enter the past. But we want to help people understand how to use that safely.
That's so incredibly true. I mean, the music is such a powerful vehicle, and just like a car, it can take you to the best place, to the promised land. It can take you all the way down to hell. So that's a very important point for everybody to be conscientious of. Drumming, rhythm, tempo. What about dance? Would you say dance along the same lines is accomplishing the same thing? Yeah.
100%. It's because it's an embodied experience to rhythm. And when the body moves in rhythm, it changes its state of consciousness. So tons of research on changing the state of consciousness through repetitive rhythmic movement. And one of the things that's fascinating is rhythmic movement by the human body increases empathy. So again, mammals are social animals. We're designed to connect with each other. And when we're in our ventral vagal safe psychological state in our nervous system, we are creative and we lean into connection. And when there's a perceived threat, whether it's external or internal, we move back into a reactive and protective state. So when we introduce music, first of all, it sets that psychological safety for the body to connect. And then when the body is in the present, we feel safe, we feel connected, and that sense of empathy increases. We will be more cooperative with others when we're in that psychologically safe state. And they've done research with all the way down to infants to test the power of repeated physical movement of the body to increase feelings of connection and empathy. And it's there. So we can kind of use that again as a tool. It's kind of like, to the layman, if you've ever been to a concert and there's that feeling of unity in the audience. When the house lights go down and the music starts, there's this connection that you just feel. That's the energy in the room, right? That's the anticipation of the bonding effect of music. When we listen to the music we prefer or make music or move rhythmically together, our brain increases the release of oxytocin, which is the hug drug. It's that chemical that allows us this feeling of feeling connected. And again, all day, every day, we need experiences where we feel psychologically safe and we feel connected.
Absolutely love that. That is so profound, especially the idea of the empathy increasing with music. That is such a practical takeaway for everybody listening. You know, you're feeling a little bit down, you're feeling a little bit isolated, just get into that music. I could talk to you all day. I have two questions that I really burning on my mind. Number one, to all those who are listening out there, when you're taking an artist and you're listening to his or her music, and there's a very deep connection going on, is it important to know where they're at in life, what their values are like? If they're a role model, if that's a message, that's a vibe, if that's somehow some deep subliminal form of communication that we want to open ourselves up to, or not necessarily so?
That's a really good question. That's a really hot topic right there. I'm going to lean in and not be afraid to just set my opinion on that, which is that because this has come up in music therapy threads a lot about artists who in their private life, it uncovers something where their behavior in their private life is really incongruent with somebody's values that they're trying to, and if I use their music, am I somehow standing by who they are when they're off stage, out of the studio, off the clock? I find that's a very limited scope to live through because all humans fall short. All humans miss the mark. We all screw up. And what this world needs a lot more of right now is grace and a lot less canceling. So if an artist in their highest moment creates this piece of work, and that piece of work now allows me to feel connected to a part of myself that prior to that music, I didn't have access to. That's wonderful. And then if that artist at a different moment in time in a lower vibration of themselves does something stupid, me personally, I'm not canceling their art because I'd have to cancel myself. I'd have to cancel everything I'm saying right now because at my lower vibration, I have done stuff that should have had me dead or in jail. And so there'd be no room for the goodness that can come out of my mouth or out of my hands as a guitarist at any point future. So that's my kind of harumph, my soapbox on that topic.
Thank you. That was breathtakingly beautiful, I have to say. And it was so optimistic and it is so realistic. There's a reason why music is inspiring. It's a message from this individual's heart in their best stage of life. Just I'll tell you a quick thing that comes to mind. Nixon once lamented, Richard Nixon, why the whole country is infatuated with Kennedy and they deride him. And he says, well, it's simple. Everybody looks at Kennedy and they see what they'd love to be in their wildest dreams: young, good looking, wealthy, great orator, charismatic. And then they look at me and they see who they are. Right? So I feel like music really helps us look at what we'd like to be. And that's the aspiration of it all.
Well said.
I know we're running out of time, but I'd love to get your take on that whole Jimi Hendrix, the 27-year-old musician thing, and somehow we lose so many of them to this tender young age. But I want to conclude by saying one thing, Tim. There's a story about a composer in Finland who was a national icon, and he made a party. All the guests there are hedge fund managers, Wall Street investors, real estate moguls. And his best friend says, what are these people doing here? You're the life of music in Finland. Why are they here? These finance people. And he says, don't judge a book by its cover. They look like they're only steeped into materialism and finance, but they live for music. It's how they go to work, listening to classical music. It's what they think about, they dream about, it's how they vacation. He says, yeah, but what about the 71 musicians in your orchestra? And he says, the musicians, all they ever talk about is money. And the joke or the parable is that not everybody gets to enjoy what they do and to live it. And watching you talk about this, it's clear that you're one of those rare creations that you enjoy it and you love it and you live it. And it's not just a day job, but it's really your calling. And that's so beautiful and inspiring. So I want to thank you so much on the Discover You podcast, sharing your time, your expertise with us. And is there anything that you would like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one last piece of optimism, because one of the biggest questions people ask, is there a talent gene? Like, I don't have it. Everything you talk about in music is so great, but not me. And two things. One, there's no single gene for music. So it's not you either have it or you don't. It's not the case. So the second thing is, you don't have to be a musician to be musical. So as far as in terms of for mental health, reaching for music, whether you can tap, snap, clap, hum, rap, sing, strum, scratch, engage with the music you love in some way. Don't be a spectator. You don't have to perform music to connect with it, but engage with it. Don't just be a spectator. Move your body to it in some way. It'll bring you into the present moment. It'll help you move emotion out of your body without having to talk about it. It'll help you tap into creativity. It'll help you to escape stress, and it'll help you to feel connected to something that's great.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today, sharing your light. And thank you to everybody joining this wonderful episode of today's Discover You. And stay tuned for the next one.